Picture 50,000 men walking into a desert. Now picture every single one of them never walking back out. Not one body, not one sword, not one sandal buried in the sand. Just gone, as if the earth itself had closed over them and left no seam. This isn't a legend somebody made up around a campfire. It's an ancient account tied to a real king, a real army, and a real date, 525 BC. And more than 2,500 years later, archaeologists are still fighting about whether it happened the way we've been told. In 2009, a team claimed they'd finally found the answer buried in the sand. Other historians looked at the same evidence and said flatly, "No, you didn't." An army large enough to conquer a small country walked into the Egyptian desert on the orders of a king who wanted to destroy a single temple, and the desert simply took them. To understand why 50,000 soldiers were marching through one of the harshest deserts on Earth, you need to understand the man who sent them. His name was Cambyses II, king of Persia, and he had inherited an empire built by his father, Cyrus the Great, one already stretching from the Aegean coast to the borders of India. In 525 BC, Cambyses conquered Egypt itself, one of the oldest and richest civilizations on the planet, defeating the pharaoh's forces at the Battle of Pelusium and folding the entire kingdom into his territory within months. A later tradition, not found in Herodotus himself, claims the Persians won partly through psychological warfare, supposedly marching sacred animals like cats at the front of their advance, betting that Egyptian soldiers would hesitate to strike them. True or exaggerated, the story fits the pattern of a king who understood Egypt's culture well enough to use it as a weapon. Once Memphis fell, Cambyses ruled as pharaoh, but Egyptian religious authority never fully bent to him the way its political structures did. Deep in the western desert sat the oasis of Siwa, home to the temple of Amun, and an oracle so respected that people traveled from across the ancient world just to ask it about their future. And that oracle answered to no one, least of all, a foreign king. According to Herodotus, within roughly a year of taking Egypt, Cambyses became fixated on destroying it. Maybe the priests had refused to legitimize his rule. Maybe he simply couldn't tolerate a religious authority in his new territory that didn't answer to him. Herodotus never gives us a clean motive, and honestly, we still don't have one today. What we do know is that Cambyses didn't send a small raiding party to handle it. He sent an army, 50,000 soldiers. That's the figure Herodotus gives us, though historians today still debate whether it's exact or inflated the way ancient writers sometimes rounded numbers up for dramatic effect. Even if the real total was half that, it was still a force large enough to besiege a major city on its own. They marched out from Thebes, crossed open desert, and reached an oasis about 7 days later, most likely the Karga Oasis, which remains a genuine water source in the middle of nowhere to this day. Up to this point, it reads like an ordinary military campaign. Soldiers resupply, rest, and push on. Then, according to Herodotus, they left Karga and marched deeper into the desert towards Siwa. And somewhere out there, they crossed into a part of the story no one has ever been able to verify. The wind reportedly came up slowly at first, just enough to sting exposed skin and pull grit into eyes already tired from days of walking. Soldiers would have noticed the horizon losing its edges, the sun turning the color of rust behind a curtain of airborne sand. Then it stopped being gradual. Herodotus describes it as a storm, violent enough to blot out the sun completely, the kind of wind that doesn't just obscure the world, but seems to erase it, howling for so long that men lost track of which direction they'd come from and which direction they were meant to be going. Picture 50,000 soldiers strung out in a column miles long, suddenly unable to see the man 5 feet in front of them. Officers screaming orders that the wind tore apart before they reached anyone. Sand driving hard enough to strip skin, filling packs, filling water skins, filling mouths. No walls to shelter behind, no rock face to crouch under. Nothing but open ground in every direction and a storm that did not seem to end. According to the account passed down to Herodotus, when the wind finally settled, there was no army left to find. No wounded crying out, no stragglers stumbling back toward Karga, no column reforming once the visibility cleared. The dunes had simply rearranged themselves over whatever remained, and the desert looked exactly as empty as it had before 50,000 men ever walked into it. That's the story that has been repeated for over 2,000 years. Whether it happened exactly that way is impossible to say because of who is actually telling it. Herodotus was not standing in that desert. He wrote this account roughly a century after it supposedly happened, and by his own admission, he was repeating what he'd been told by Egyptian priests, the very religious establishment Cambyses had allegedly set out to punish. That doesn't automatically make the account false, but it does mean we are dealing with secondhand testimony from a source with its own reasons to shape the story a certain way, and any honest retelling of this mystery has to say that plainly. What we can say with more confidence is that history has no record of that army ever completing its mission, retreating home, or being defeated in any documented battle. 50,000 men, or some real number close to it, simply stop appearing in the historical record after that march. No empire loses a force that size quietly, and yet Persia did. For most of human history, this stayed exactly what it sounds like: a strange, unverifiable line in an old Greek text, filed away with no way to test it. Nobody had the resources, or frankly a strong enough reason, to go searching for an army buried somewhere inside 700,000 square kilometers of shifting sand. That began to change in the 20th century, as explorers and archaeologists grew fascinated by the idea of finally finding physical proof. In the 1930s, the Hungarian explorer Laszlo Almasi, later the inspiration for the novel and film, The English Patient, spent years combing the western desert by car and by air, convinced Herodotus's route could be traced and the army's remains recovered. He found ancient trade routes, forgotten wells, and cave paintings, but never anything that could be tied directly to Cambyses' men. Other expeditions followed the same pattern for decades: real effort, real expertise, and nothing conclusive to show for it. Local Bedouin communities occasionally reported strange metal fragments or bones surfacing after violent windstorms reshaped the dunes, but none of it ever held up once examined closely. Later expeditions tried a different approach entirely, using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar to scan for buried structures or disturbed terrain along the likely route, hoping technology could succeed where decades of on-foot searching hadn't. Those scans turned up ancient wells, old caravan paths, even the outlines of long-abandoned settlements, but nothing that could be tied to a lost Persian army. The scale of the problem is hard to overstate. The western desert covers roughly 700,000 square kilometers, and dunes there can shift dozens of meters in a single major storm, meaning any wreckage or remains from a single event could easily have been buried, unburied, and reburied dozens of times over 25 centuries. The desert simply does not give up what it swallows easily, if it ever gives it up at all. Then, in 2009, two Italian archaeologists, brothers Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, announced something that made headlines around the world. While surveying a remote stretch of the Egyptian desert, they reported finding scattered human remains, bronze weapons, and jewelry consistent with the Persian era, all in a location that roughly lined up with the ancient route towards Siwa. For a moment, it genuinely looked like one of history's oldest disappearances had finally been solved. Then actual historians and archaeologists started examining the claims, and the pushback was immediate and serious. Critics pointed out that the team had not published proper peer-reviewed documentation. The artifacts were never dated using rigorous methods the wider academic community could independently verify. Egypt's own antiquities officials, alongside independent historians, said the evidence simply did not meet the bar required to declare the mystery solved. To this day, mainstream Egyptology does not treat the lost army of Cambyses as a closed case. The 2009 find remains, at best, an intriguing lead that was never properly confirmed, and at worst, a media story that outran the actual science behind it. There's something almost unbearable about a mystery this size having no ending. 50,000 soldiers isn't an abstract statistic, it's 50,000 individual men who woke up one morning, put on their armor, and started walking. Somewhere in that number was a soldier who had left a wife behind in Persia, a young recruit on his first campaign, nervous and trying not to show it, an officer who had survived a dozen real battles and figured a desert march would be the easy stretch of his career. We don't have a single one of their names. Herodotus never recorded them. No letters survived, no gravestones, nothing personal at all. Every one of them exists in history only inside one collective sentence passed down through a foreign historian who never met them. It's not just that they disappeared. It's that they disappeared so completely that history didn't even preserve who they were as people, only that they had once existed and then, according to the record, simply stopped. Beyond the sandstorm explanation, modern historians have floated other theories over the years, and none of them fully close the case either. Some argue Herodotus's account was partly propaganda, a way for Egyptian priests to frame an invading force as struck down by the gods themselves for threatening their temple, when in reality, the army may have simply lost its way, run out of water, and died slowly across days or weeks rather than vanishing in one dramatic storm. Others, including modern historian Olaf Kaper of Leiden University, have proposed something entirely different, that the army wasn't destroyed by weather at all, but was ambushed and defeated by an Egyptian rebel king who controlled that region at the time, and that the sandstorm account was invented afterward to disguise a military defeat. Neither theory has been proven. Neither has been fully ruled out either. Multiple plausible explanations, no conclusive evidence, and an army that has been missing for 2,500 years. Here's what stays with me about this one. We live in a world now where losing a single hiker triggers a multi-agency search within hours. Losing an airplane makes international news for years. And here, we have 50,000 men who vanished so completely that even the historian writing about it a century later couldn't tell you exactly how it happened, only that it did. Somewhere under the sand of the western desert, there may genuinely be an answer waiting. A rusted sword, a collapsed campsite, something. Or maybe the desert really did erase them as completely as the old account claims, grain by grain, until there was nothing left to find at all. So here's what I want to know from you. If you were one of those soldiers, watching the sky turn orange and the wind start to howl louder than anything you'd ever heard, would you have kept marching forward, trusting your king's mission? Or would you have turned back, knowing that desertion meant execution if you were caught? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. Somewhere between history and legend, an army disappeared. Follow the ink vault. We go where others don't.